there appear to be some similarities and of course some differences between the way that some of the issues in the Tigray region as it relates to the war and sort of what we're hearing dog whistles of now if there was to be conflict between the forces in the Amhara region and the federal government. How do you think Tigray and Amhara, as it relates to their issues with the government, are similar and or different and different?
Hermela, this is a very bad place to be in as a country. I mean, the level of mistrust that you have, we're almost treating each other as foreigners. Think about it. The federal Ethiopian National Defense Force is being roadblocked by Amharas, right? The same thing happened before Tigray went on a full revolt against, the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. And to be honest with you, Hermela, even though I'm sad, but it is something to be expected. And I'll tell you why. What would you expect if you have literally confederated your nation along ethnic lines and only ethnic lines, all right? And you give these regional states unprecedented amount of both political and economic power, and you finally resort to weaponizing them. You give them special forces. All 14 regions have special forces now, right? And there's a lot of mistrust between each of these regional states. Amhara and Tigray are a case in point, but there are territorial disputes between Somali and Oromia region, between Sidama and Oromia, between, Benishangul Gumuz and Amhara region, Benishangul Gumuz and Oromia region. So it means you now have a recipe for an outburst of violence everywhere you have territorial disputes and border disputes between the regional states. So in principle, what the federal government is trying to do is to retake the monopoly of violence from all these regional forces, centrifugal forces, and at least have a means whereby every territorial dispute is not going to be violently contested, and you would not have mini civil wars breaking out left and right. So in principle, there's nothing wrong with what the federal government is trying to achieve. In fact, it is right. The problem is the ruling coalition, Prosperity Party itself, is divided. There is deep mistrust between Amhara PP, the Amhara Prosperity Party leaders, and the Oromia Prosperity Party leaders. This mistrust has also got to do with what people now think is a realignment of alliance between Oromo PP on the one hand and the prime minister on the other, and the Amharas feeling that they're being pushed out to the margins, right? So like I said, it's sort of a natural consequence of what happened in this country over the past 32 years, though unfortunate and tragic. And, how is this similar to the situation of Tigray? It is similar in the sense that both the Tigrayan elite pre-2020 and now the Amharas feel like they're being left out from the center. They're being pushed out by the Oromo elite. They're no more partners at the center, but they're being peripheralized, right? And so they think the resort to armed resistance is one way of securing some position of influence, some position of bargain against the center. In that sense, they're very similar, Hermel.
So there's there's a difference between whether Amharas feel like they're represented or not by those that are in power within the Prosperity Party versus they feel more represented if there are some of the regional there's some popular political folks within the region that they would like to see sit at the table. There was an advocacy to have Amhara regional representatives at the table in Pretoria. We didn't see that happening, but what we do know for sure about armed conflict is that it's always the people that get hurt, right? We saw that Absolutely. From Tigray, and yet, there is a sense that this one would be justified as what people, that are coming from the Amhara regions or that support some of the resistance there are saying. But as we saw with Tigray, it just took us backwards. So what is the path forward? What are a few different paths that you could see happening from here on out?
Who wants to see another rerun of what happened over the past 2 years? I mean, the conservative estimate is we lost around 600,000 Ethiopians in 2 years' time, right? We sustained a damage which is now estimated to the tune of 30 billion US dollars. 30 billion. Imagine all of these means schools and hospitals and health centers, airports, and everything that this poor country has invested on for decades was, it was destroyed, right? So I for one do not think that this showdown, this conflict between the Amhara public and the Amhara region to a given extent and the federal government should go down the road of a violent confrontation. I hope and I pray honestly that it would not go down that road. What other mechanisms do we have? That's a great question, Hermela. Nothing but dialogue, right? And the first order of dialogue should be for the Amhara Prosperity Party leaders themselves and the federal government officials to come to the Amhara region and face the public and convince the public that this is not something done to isolate and to victimize Amhara. This is not to leave them insecure and defenseless, given what the Amharas feel, which is an impending strike by the TPLF, and that this is not a solution to resolve the issue of Welkait and Tzagede, right? So there should be a massive exertion of effort and communication and dialogue on the part of the federal government and the Amhara regional state to literally calm down the public and to convince the public and to find other mechanisms of resolving these misunderstandings. My worry is it would be too late, because right now what I see is, I see two things. On the one hand, the government is beaming out this message saying, oh, this has been decided upon, deliberated upon. It's only some elements who want power and who want to destabilize peace who are doing this. On the other hand, the government is kind of beaming the signal that, if you try to resist and to protest, we'll crack down on it, right? And so you're sending out a mixed signal as a federal government. The problem is, the more you threaten people, the more they become apprehensive, the more they become hostile, and they may not have the goodwill to, wait and listen to you and hear you out and reason with you, right? And so, as far as I'm concerned, Hermela, I think there's no way out except for dialogue between the Amhara regional state leaders and the federal government officials with the Amhara populace, the Amhara public in general. I'll add one more thing. I think there should be a very honest discussion between the TPLF and the Amhara regional state. These two cannot just, literally skirt around this issue of Welkait and Tzagede. There's a prisoner dilemma. They seriously believe that, this is going to be resolved by either some sort of a constitutional means or by force. I don't think both options are good options, to be honest with you, because they would have a zero-sum sense to them. One would win, the other would lose. The only way that both the Tigrayan people and the Amharas could win is if these two come together to the table and find out a way where they can devise a win-win solution on these provinces of Welkait and Tzagede. If we tackle that, much of the paranoia around disarmament of special forces and all that could be resolved, Hermel.
And I think your point, or you're mentioning the Constitution, would also be problematic, as under the Constitution, it falls under Tigray, because the Constitution that we have is still the one that TPLF created in the early 1990s. Isn't there something in the middle? And I guess that's what you're saying in terms of having the TPLF leadership or the Tigray leadership and the Amhara leadership. But when we say that, who are we talking about? Because if we're talking about Getachew and then the Amhara PP, I don't think the people are going to like that. So who is going to be at the table for that?
So let's talk about options. As you just mentioned, if you were to settle this along constitutional lines, for one, and then you believe that whatever the borders existed pre-2018 should be restored. So there's no dispute. These provinces should be immediately handed over to Tigray. But you can only imagine the kind of resistance, the kind of violence and bloodshed that could break out when the Amhara forces in Welkait Agadi are told to leave. So I think short term, that is a recipe for disaster. Okay. Neither would the Tigrayans just let it go. Just because the Amharas and the federal government had a military upper hand today and they took it away from them by force, that doesn't mean Tigray would, relinquish its, request on these provinces. It will. As a matter of fact, Getachew, the first thing he mentioned on his statement was, he said, my first order of business is to make sure these provinces are returned back to us. So, these two options for me are, they're very risky, right? So what I'm thinking is either craft a special regional administrative zone, something like Addis Ababa, which is now under federal jurisdiction, or Derese, where, the federal government, until some long-lasting settlement is gained, would have jurisdiction over these provinces. So neither the Amharas nor the Tigrayans would have, jurisdiction over it, right? But I don't think that's a lasting solution. Another solution would be to think about an arrangement where both the Tigrayan and the Amhara regional state officials would run the province together. So basically share power, right? That's also another option you can think of. A third option, which is not in the horizon, is maybe big picture, if the current constitutional design is revisited. Let's say the Ethiopian public settles that the Amhara region be broken down into 3 or 4 provinces or Oromia, and we now have a new territorial configuration, right? And that sort of arrangement, the issue of with Welkait, with Tigray, or with Amhara, that could be redundant, but we are not there yet, right? So go ahead.
Yeah. To your point, it's a conflict area, right? So there's a movement that says, it was Amhara region before TPLF, so now it's Amhara land. And then, of course, the people from Tigray or activists are saying, it's Tigrayan land because of the constitution. And it just seems like both of those choices aren't really holistic and aren't going to bring a lasting solution. So I think I agree with some of what you're saying there. Thanks for watching. Are you a patron of Hermela TV yet? If not, join now with just a few clicks and support our content production. Just go to patreon.com/Hermela TV on a web browser or download the Patreon app on any Apple or Android device. Click Become a Patron and sign up. Thanks so much for your support.